I also want to welcome, they're called supervisors, Esther and Larry. I think supervisors is the wrong word. We often say supervisor, but you're more like academic advisors, cheerleaders, friends, supporters. So welcome to the supervisors and welcome to the review panel. Thanks, Sean and Katie, and welcome to all your supporters who are here to hear about your work and support you today, Jamie. I hope you can really feel and notice that in this room. So thank you to those of you on Zoom. I can't see you right now, but we know you're there. So thanks for your support as well. And what I will do is in a second, I'll hand over to Jane, who has 20 minutes to present work. And then we'll have the opportunity for questions from anybody here and discussion. And then that part of it will finish and just the review panel will remain for further discussion. So does anyone have any questions or things they want? Well, thanks for being here and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Ko Jamie Denton toko ingoa, no digital educator aho. Kia ora and welcome. My name is Jamie Denton and I am a digital educator. This presentation and the associated proposal utilise this term digital educator to represent a specific type of contemporary educator. In this conception, the digital educator is one who is passionate about the use of digital technologies and active in seeking the ways to leverage the affordances of such technologies to provide unique, previously unimaginable or unachievable educational experiences. I am a digital educator. My research, having been influenced in particular by ideas raised in Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto and staying with the trouble, making kin in the Cthulhu scene, and Tim Ingold's Against Space, Place, Movement Knowledge, and the mesh work seeks to develop nuanced understandings of the complex, fluid, and highly personalized phenomena that is the professional identities of these digital educators. Through critical and collaborative autoethnography, and by using storytelling, narrative inquiry, collaborative conversations, and critical reflection, this research intends to elicit and explore rich personal narratives of three critical states of identity and identity formation: being, becoming, and belonging. It is anticipated the findings of this research will have implications for the professional practices, professional development needs and opportunities, and collaborative communities of digital educators. They also aim to stimulate moments of critical reflection in others, imploring them to consider, am I also a digital educator? The main mechanisms through which this topic will be researched will be the generation and analysis of individual and collaborative narratives. I've always been intrigued by narratives and their deep history throughout the ages, cultures, and different civilizations. They serve many different purposes throughout human history, including propagating cultural norms, values, and traditions. Although these narratives have adapted and taken on different forms, they remain important within contemporary society. Indeed, present-day narratives have developed from those traditional oral storytellings to incorporate audiovisual technologies and more experimental narrative approaches such as nonlinear, branching, and transmedia technology-rich immersive world-building experiences. However, despite this evolution in form, the narratives continue to retain many of their original purposes. One such purpose, which is of particular importance for this research, is that humans use the construction and reciting of narratives as a tool through which to make sense of their experiences, with these narratives ultimately becoming important within their conception of self and their expression of self. It is these narratives that the digital educators construct and tell about themselves that are of primary importance to this research. At this point, I acknowledge the influence of critical ethnographers such as Stacey Holman-Jones, Carolyn Ellis, Hee-Won Chang, and others on the conception of this research. These fierce advocates and dedicated researchers have taught me the power of applying theory to these narratives. They've taught me to accept the self as a valid and important subject of inquiry. They've taught me that autoethnographic approaches provide platforms for voices often lost in traditional research. The intricate bodies of work composed by these autoethnographers also teach us that humans are not composed or composers of a single story. Instead, they're capable of constructing and reciting multiple, possibly contradictory stories, compilations, and narratives. Like Fitzpatrick, I'm conscious that I too am a patchwork. I'm a bricolage. I'm a compilation of many stories. I am a complex self. I'm conscious that my participants will also be these things. I'm conscious that one of the difficulties in my research will be choosing the stories to communicate and which ones to critically analyse. This presentation is also a patchwork, the compilation of the pieces that comprise the proposed inquiry. I wish to take you back to 2012. The Curiosity rover has landed on Mars. The Costa Concordia has run aground. Gangnam Style has gone wild, completely viral. I was working as a lecturer in Hamilton in Kirikiriroa at a polytechnic there. It's a clear, dry, early Saturday afternoon. I absent-mindedly pressed the accelerator down. I've driven this road hundreds of times before. I'll drive it thousands of times more. Stereos belting out some long forgotten song, tall trees lining the sides of the road, stretching on and on. It's so incredibly easy to lose yourself here, and so incredibly easy to lose sight of the crossroads. Then in a heartbeat, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. Screeching, glass shatters, metal twists into sickeningly blasphemous shapes, flesh and bone distort. Another vehicle failed to stop at their stop sign, my car ploughing into the side of theirs at high speed. The recovery was slow. I spent months in a moon boot and on crutches, subject to endless tests until eventually a herniated disc was discovered. This was the cause of the nerve pain and reduced function in my right leg. Once I returned to work, I needed to substitute the physical formativity of my previous teaching, and I did so with digital simulations and early precursors to augmented reality. Over the months it took my body to heal, my educational practice began to shift. Once I recovered, it made no sense to go back to the ways of before. The solutions I found were only possible due to the extraordinary advancements in digital technologies that had occurred in the past few decades. Echoing Haraway's 1991 vision of a world of heightened human-computer interaction, with humans and machines merged into a hybrid of machine and organism, these advancements in digital technologies were creating our contemporary world. A world in which humans are perpetually connected to devices, networks, and information. A world where such technological advancements have afforded opportunities to reconfigure the temporal and spatial factors associated with engaging in higher education. And a world that has provided opportunities to reconsider the teaching and learning approaches we employ, and enabling us to use previously inconceivable ways to engage our students with the material, this teacher, and the other students. However, at the time when I was recovering, the uptake of these digital technologies was incredibly varied. Some educators were philosophically opposed to their use, others quickly adopted them and started experimenting. We now step forward a couple of years to 2014. For the last 2 years, my professional practice has been filled with experimentation, failures, successes, learnings, but I feel the metamorphosis is still occurring. In the blink of an eye, everything's changed. My mother has been diagnosed with cancer. It's already spread. The first we knew of it, it's already in her brain. We didn't know it then, but we're fighting the hardest we've ever fought in a fight that's stacked from the start. She was placed into an intensive care unit to await surgery, a fluorescent purgatory. 3 days of nothing but watching time tick by and hearing the endless mechanical chorus of bleeping machines that are designed to purely humor us. During those dark days, I turned even more to digital technologies as a crutch. While previously they gave me a way to teach my students in person in new ways, now they provided a way for me to physically be in Auckland and teach my students in Hamilton. Somewhere between crash cars and here, I'd crossed some kind of fuzzy threshold to become a digital educator. In March 2020, digital technologies became the only option to maintain our educational continuity during COVID-19 associated lockdowns. With no other option, we mandated technology-mediated learning. The rapid, almost overnight switch from in-person to online learning left many educators and learners scrambling to adjust, provided little opportunity to consider pedagogical implications of such a change. Later, despite an easing of the public health measures associated with the pandemic, increased experimentation with digital technologies has been noted, leading to more novel uses of technology and a post-pandemic appetite for research that incorporates digital technologies into teaching and learning. As more educators incorporate digital technologies into their professional practice, it becomes more important to gain a better understanding of how and in what ways this impacts on their sense of professional identity. Excuse me. At this time, we turn our attention to identity and conceptions of identity. Contemporary perspectives of identity reject the idea that identity is fixed. Instead, contemporary perspectives propose more fluid understandings of identity, with postmodern perspectives recognizing identity as a continuing site of struggle. Such postmodern perspectives envision identity as an assemblage of our past experiences, thoughts, preferences, and learnings entangling with our past and present interactions with human and non-human actors. At this time, I acknowledge the influence of Tim Ingold's conception of threads, knots, and meshwork. In Ingold's work, he argues against the notion of people existing in fixed spaces or places, instead conceiving of existence as a form of wayfinding. According to Ingold, during this wayfinding, as an individual moves through their life in all the spaces and places of their existence, they leave traces or threads of themselves. These threads reflect their thoughts, experiences, preferences, and so forth. Each thread is representative only of the individual who leaves it. However, when the threads of multiple people overlap, it creates knots or entanglements. And these are indicative of the experiences, attitudes, and preferences that are shared between those two individuals. With these threads and knots, they ultimately combine, forming a meshwork across multiple people, portraying a sum of shared experiences representing community, organization, or culture. I use this framework to assist with the conception of individual and shared identity, and to assist in the articulation of the threads, the identification of the entanglements and knots, and to unearth the meshwork associated with being, becoming, and belonging as a digital educator. Finally, I acknowledge three dominant ideas within Donna Haraway's work that have influenced the conception of this research. Firstly, Haraway's idea of staying with the trouble is a call to stay present and engaged in the complex, interconnected problems of our time, rather than looking for easy solutions. It is an approach that recognizes the entanglements between humans and other beings and systems, and is an invitation to embrace uncertainty, remain curious, and work towards an equitable, just, and sustainable future. Of particular influence on this research is the need to stay engaged with the complex, interconnected problems, the need to avoid preemptively rushing to easy solutions, the need to recognize the myriad of entanglements, and the need to embrace uncertainty and curiosity. Next, Haraway uses the phrase surrounding the problem to describe an approach to examining complex and interconnected issues. Rather than focusing on a single aspect of an issue, Haraway suggests we surround the problem, investigating it from multiple angles, engaging with its many complexities, and considering the diverse, potentially contradictory perspectives of those impacted by it. By surrounding the problem, Haraway encourages us to embrace complexity, challenge binary thinking, and seek new ways to understand and address complex topics or issues. Finally, Haraway uses the term symbiosis to describe the collective, collaborative, and dynamic processes through which organisms and systems come together to co-create through ongoing interactions and collaborations. Haraway suggests this term as a way to challenge individualistic and reductionist ways of understanding, whilst also emphasizing the importance of entangled relationships and dependencies between different organisms and their environments. This has been influential in the conception and development of collaborative modes of articulating these threads of identity within this research and the approach to investigating potential knots and meshwork. I aim to explore my stories and others' stories in a symbiosis, a collaborative narrative that will result in the gifting of narratives to each other. With the time remaining, I wish to turn our attention to the actual study design. The research is underpinned and guided by two main research questions, which are on screen now. The first of these considers what stories individual educators tell of their journey to becoming and feeling a sense of belonging as a digital educator. The second investigates how digital educators conceive of and continue to nurture their professional identities or their sense of being. The project itself is comprised of three distinct studies: being, becoming, and belonging. And each study follows the same methodological structure. We'll have two phases. The first phase consists of myself working as the sole subject of inquiry, and the second phase, myself with a small group of participants, about 4 or 5 participants. This phasic approach allows the undertaking of the majority of phase 1 before the start of phase 2, which provides opportunities for any changes that are needed or any modifications needed before we head into phase 2. In this first phase, I'll generate a critical autoethnographic piece that responds to the reflective prompts put forward by the study. As the developed piece may need to communicate complex and potentially conflicting information, this autoethnographic piece may be in the form of graphic narrative, poetry, song lyrics, written prose, many different forms. After producing this first piece, I'll undertake a critical review and analysis of it. Based on the insights gained, I'll generate a second autoethnographic piece that responds to the first piece. This again will retain that same creative freedom in form. And following that, will be reviewed and analysed, looking for themes between the two different pieces. In the second phase of each study, this will involve collaboratively working with the participants, but each participant as an individual, not as a participant group. It involves 6 distinct activities. Firstly, the study's prompt will be shared with the participant, who will then create or choose an artifact, maybe a photograph or a found poem or something similar that they will create, and they will bring this to this collaborative conversation. And that will start the collaborative conversation. So this is like an interview type session where myself and the participant will meet. However, rather than using it as a semi-structured interview, the goal is to be more collaborative, less extractive, and more conversational in nature. Following that narrative conversation, I'll transcribe, review, and analyze the themes that emerge from that narrative conversation. From there, I will create the autoethnographic piece that's based on number 2 and bring that autoethnographic piece into a second narrative conversation with the participant. So the second narrative conversation is about us working collaboratively to review and analyze the piece created in number 4. which is then transcribed, reviewed, analysed. On screen, really hard to see, will be the timeline. Okay, starting from June 2023, finishing in May 26, which is representative of my part-time nature within the program. You'll see it's split off into the 3 studies, finishing off with the writing phase and putting it all together. The next step after today will be looking at managing the feedback from today. So I'm looking forward to the feedback and conversation from today to incorporate that into this next phase. And that would then feed into the ethics application. So I've deliberately left ethics until after today and after the conversations from today. And with the last 10 seconds that I have of my 20 minutes, I'd like to thank you all for coming. This brings me to the end of this presentation. I had to rush at the very start, lost my breath a little bit, but that's all good, we got there. I'd like to invite you now for any questions or feedback. But I want to thank you, those of you in the room, those of you on Zoom, for your time today. Kia ora.
Very engaging presentation. Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, open to anyone who would like to ask a question, something of interest. Those of you on Zoom, I know it can be a little odd being out there on the screen, but you're very much part of this room, so please ask your questions as well. And don't wait for me to see your hand. Oh, I can see your hands, I can't see your name.
Yeah.
Nicoletta.
I've brought the chat up on screen so everyone can see the chat
Nicoletta.
in the room.
I think she's clapping.
Oh, she's clapping. Okay, that's me. Educator not understanding the signs. Is anyone on Zoom there got a question or a comment or something they'd like to contribute?
Kia ora, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well done, Jamie. I really like the sound of the study. I like the way that your staircase at the end was an easy walk down the stairs, not up the stairs. I think that's the way to approach a doctorate with optimism. I'm just wondering, Jamie, if you're thinking about the kind of rapid developments in AI and how they may impact on the narratives that develop over the next few years, if you've had any thoughts in those areas.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Paul. So for those of you in the room that might not have heard that question, it was talking about the rapid developments in AI that have occurred over the last little while. And as we know, obviously there's been a massive disruption since about November last year when ChatGPT had a wonderful campaigns through TikTok and became like the new generative AI. I've tried to deliberately keep the research somewhat fluid to enable me to keep ahead of these sorts of things. Obviously, technology does move quite quickly and how we respond to it needs to move relatively quickly. I was quite fascinated that, and I won't show it on screen, but I actually put into a text to image generator through AI, what the AI thought a digital educator was. And I got these kind of weird cyborg images back. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll ask it what it thinks a digital educator teaching a group of students was. I got about 5 images and I just looked at those and they were all a teacher standing in front of the room with some funky looking projector unit behind them and students sitting in rows with laptops in front of them. It was fascinating because it's like, well, you haven't, like the AI is not even considering this new world that we're heading into. It's still thinking of the very sage on the stage type approach. So I think right now, to preempt where AI will be in the next 6 months to a year would do it disservice. And it's going to be something I need to look into as I get further along. And I know that sounds like kicking the can down the road, but I honestly don't know if we're far enough into generative AI to really understand it at this stage.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm wondering, just given you're using writing as method and an autoethnographic approach, if some kind of conversations with chatbots could be something that would be interesting to explore.
Yeah, I'm curious with that and how that's going to sit with our academic integrity standards.
Yeah.
Because right now we're really wrestling with that as a university of does this count as academic integrity problems or not, and using these sorts of things. But yeah, I'd be open to considering it as a method or as an option. I guess if I reference and state exactly what came out of ChatGPT or similar and what was mine, I may be able to get around it.
Yeah, and even if it was just an imaginary conversation,
Yeah.
you know, thinking about the evocative potential of autoethnography, just an idea anyway. I just, yeah, like
Great
the
question.
idea of a digital educator having a bit of a chat with a AI device about the potential of what a digital educator is, just based on your experience of the images that were thrown back to you when you.
Yeah, that sounds really good. The only problem with that is the AI can't buy me a beer over it. Thanks.
Questions in the room?
Some snippets of observation. So firstly, about being, becoming, and belonging. It so happens that these are the strands of the Australian early childhood curriculum. So I think it would be quite interesting because the digital educator is like a sort of the beginnings of this. Let's say so. I thought that this was interesting. Another idea now, because we are all here and probably part of the stream of consciousness, from the first time I was thinking about Donna and this machine. So this ID, this identity of a person plus technology is one. So I was thinking for the first time that we split from the duality in gender-based or whatever, which basically said that the feminine gender is more relational and the male gender is more active. And I think it's this interplay between 2080. So when our identity is human plus machine, it's like a dynamics when we switch. Sometimes we are 80% relational to machine. Sometimes we are the other way around. Well, the figures could be different, but I looked in the room and it looks like 2080 right now. So I'm fascinated by this number. Yeah. And the last thing I would like to say, maybe two more little snippets. But last thing I wanted to say was about the design, which I think it's amazing. And after the collaborative narratives, let's say, coming back with the participants to see what was about. I think this is probably a double-edged sword because it's part of our identity to change. So when in the beginning, participants may have one identity and contribute in one way, but after the work is done and you've done the work, they might change their mind or they might reach or withdraw. So I think this is a sort. So
yeah.
And we might stop there if that's okay, because you might want to respond to the idea that they're going to change over time, or maybe you just like the next questions.
Yeah, so with the narrative conversations, and one thing I didn't have a lot of time to talk about was the time frame over which these are occurring, and it's actually a very short time frame. So I totally agree that the identity is going to change quite and relatively quickly, but the window of time that I'm hoping to work with is within a few weeks between narrative conversation 1 and 2. So while there will still be some change and the things that are talked about in the first conversation, people may want to change and they might want to fix up in the second one, which is absolutely no problem whatsoever. I don't anticipate at this stage, and maybe it will happen, radical shifts in their thinking between the two sessions because of that short time frame. I think if it was sort of a few months or so longer, then possibly. But I totally take your point. Yeah, I agree.
I'm only saying
sorry, I've got a difficult role as the chair here because we've got a very short amount of time. So I really encourage you to keep your conversation going later. I might have to jump to some more questions. I really apologise for that.
Yes, perhaps we can catch up and have a chat a bit later on.
That would be really excellent.
Because those are really interesting points. And I really appreciate them. Thank you.
Yeah, Lynn has done some lovely
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So that would be amazing.
I came through this.
Yeah.
I'll put you in context.
So
with-
normally we have, normally we have 2 hours and we've only got 1 hour. So normally I wouldn't jump to something else. I'm really sorry about that. But can I move back to Zoom because there might be a question. for one
Doesn't
of
seem to
you
have been
over
anything
here.
that's come up yet.
There's a comment there about the presentation. We have another 5 minutes, so we might be able to come back. Is there another question or? Yes.
Thanks again for your presentation. Thought it was informative, well put together. You talked a bit at the start about your philosophical positioning of the study. I was wondering if you could clarify, because you mentioned being like a digital educator, and you're talking about a digital world, whether you could clarify what you see as being digital, and then perhaps something that might not be digital, so where that boundary sort of lies.
Yeah, so this is probably one of the biggest things I've wrestled with, and the people who've read the proposal see this probably a bit more than I could get across in 20 minutes. What I've done in the written work is sort of say that it's a pretty false divorcing to say educators, digital educators. It's kind of the split that doesn't really make a lot of sense because everyone's using some technology in some way. Where I've gone with the bigger thinking is using the SAMR model, which looks at substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition as ways of categorizing the use that and said that if somebody is using their using technologies within their professional practice to at least augment, so modify their teaching in some way that would be different from how they do it in an in-person method, then those are the people I've thrown in this arbitrary bucket for now, just because, yeah, I need to somehow make some separation. Yeah, but so in terms of that digital world, and this is something that was quite interesting that Lena mentioned about relationality and digital, and for me, we can build relationships online and we do it all the time. And so these things, I don't see this binaryism anymore. I'm seeing this as a far more complicated spectrum. So where does digital start and where does in-person stop is quite a difficult boundary to push. For instance, right now, there's people online, so they're getting a fully digital experience. Other people here are getting a fully analog experience. And it's, so yeah, it's kind of that weird, where is this line? It's an interesting point, but really good question. Thank you.
Any other questions on Zoom or in the room? I'm sure there are a ton of questions. I know there are a ton of questions. But unfortunately, we will have to save those for another occasion. But I really, really encourage you. I know Jamie will want to engage with the conversation for those opportunities. So I want to really thank everybody for participating here, either as a digital participant, is that right, or an in-person participant? Thanks for your support and your interest. I am really interested in this work, Jamie. It's fascinating, and I can tell from your questions and comments that others are as well. So I will encourage you to continue the conversations in other spaces. Unfortunately, now we'll need to finish this part of the process, and we'll move to the review committee. So thanks, Jamie, and take a couple of minutes and get